Hello, everyone, and welcome to Project Insights Project Management webinar. The topic for today is part 2 of storytelling for project managers. Just a few things to note before we get started. All participants will be placed on mute. However, if you have any questions, they're more than welcome. Please go ahead and type those into your question box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we will try to answer all of your questions during the session. But if we can't, we'll make sure to get back to you through email before the end of the day. All of our PM training sessions are valid for 1 PDU free of charge. However, you must be in attendance for the full session. I will email you your PDU certificate by the end of today, so I do ask that you please hold off on emailing me about your certificate until then. And for all other PDU information, please visit our PI community, type in PDU in the search, and you will find the PMI rules in an article called Webinars and PDUs. Also, please note that this webinar recording and slides will be available within our Project Insight community, and they will also be sent to you via email by tomorrow. My name is Denise, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. If you're not already familiar with Project Insight, we're a cloud-based project management solution. We work with two kinds of companies, those that are rapidly growing and need to scale the way they're managing their projects, and those who want greater visibility across their project portfolio, want more insight into the workloads of the resources, and want a better way to collaborate on projects among team members. If any of these sound familiar to you and you'd like to learn more, please feel free to give us a call, send us an email, or you can always request your free demo at projectinsight.net. Unfortunately, Diane Buckley, our host for today, will not be able to join us. So that makes me your moderator and host for the day. And joining me will be our presenter, Jennifer Samuel Chance. Jennifer, aka Miss Jen, has used her 18 years of experience in award-winning international speaker and storytelling coach to conduct over 1,700 presentations on leadership through powerful communication skills around the world. She specializes in speaking and coaching in the transformative power of strategic storytelling that is designed to grab attention, close sales, and grow leaders. Jennifer holds an MBA from the University of Tampa, Florida, and she was also 2014 and 15 Speaker Academy Dean of the National Speakers Association for the Central Florida chapter. Good morning, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. This is a two-man team today, so we got this.
Oh, we got this. We miss Diane, but we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can get through it. Okay, I am doing the technology thing here. Can you see my screen?
Good to go.
Fabulous. Okay. So, storytelling for project management. This is part 2 of the webinar series on how you can use storytelling as project managers to be better communicators. So I'm going to do a real brief recap. So for those of you that don't quite remember all of the wonderful details of the last time we were together, for those of you that came the first time, I'll just go ahead and refresh your memory. So storytelling for project managers. The essence of it is that many of you are in situations where you are project managers and there are so many other factors around you that you have no control over that it makes it sometimes hard to finish and complete projects on time. Studies have shown that less than 40% of your projects actually finish on time and under budget or on budget. And when you look at reasons why, sometimes the reason behind that, because you are usually juggling so many different pieces or interacting with so many different stakeholders, then communication is usually the key as to whether things happen or they don't. And my research has shown that most project managers that do say when things are successful or not successful, most of your communication journey is 80 to 90% of the job. So if you don't pay attention to what's happening to your communication skills, then it may be contributing to whether some projects are successful as they could be. Doesn't mean that we're blaming you. It does mean that you are the conduit. So as a refresher as to why you should pay attention to storytelling, storytelling is the glue. It is the conduit that enables you to interact with the managers, upper management, your teams, your peers. And as the slide says, storytelling managers could use storytelling when they need to teach, update information, and persuade others to adopt new ways and or change behavior. It is kind of like sometimes a bitter pill that's easier to swallow when it comes in storytelling mode. So to refresh your memory as to far as which stories you should tell, depends on the intent, situation, and the time that you have. And different narratives serve different situations. And I know a lot of what we'll probably say today, I will say it depends. And that's only because many of you come from different backgrounds, different industries, different situations with your projects, there is no one cookie cutter answer. However, there are certain core principles to follow that you can use those and then adapt them to your own area, and that will make hopefully storytelling an easier job for you. So, short stories, metaphors, and analogies. You use those when you typically give short presentations and maybe even conversations with people. Full stories, which tend to be longer, more than I would say 2-3 minutes, then when you're giving speeches and presentations, then tend to be more appropriate. That isn't to say that you can't use short stories and metaphors and analogies in full presentations. It's just that when you have a longer amount of time that you have to speak, then sometimes full stories do paint the picture quite well. To refresh your memory, we talked a lot in the last seminar regarding metaphors and analogies, and those are really, really short stories. Metaphor, to refresh your memory, is the use of words or short phrases that already have stories attached to them, and it allows you to capture a picture, a complete story in just a few words. Analogies are longer phrases that paint pictures. So today we're going to talk more about metaphors and analogies, talk a little bit more about stories, and today is really focused about questions that you guys sent in to have answered regarding how you can possibly use storytelling in what you do in your day-to-day life. So, question number 1, question from you. Can you use or should you use storytelling when telling a team member that they're doing their job poorly? It depends. I would say overall, yes, storytelling can be used. It's a matter of when you actually use the story. So if you're a project manager and you do have somebody that is not stepping up to the plate, then of course your first directive needs to be why. Is it a factor or factors that are beyond their control, or is it them? And that involves you asking a lot of questions. And coming from a perspective of not necessarily pointing the finger, even though it could be them that's 100% at fault, but stepping back a little bit and being objective and asking and finding out, is the reason they're doing poorly beyond their control, which means it could be environmental factors around them that causes them to do a poor job, or is it that they haven't had enough training or education that enables them to truly understand their part of the puzzle and therefore would enable them to do a poor job? Or is it truly them? And again, all of that will be cleared up when you ask questions. Asking questions is one of the most powerful tools you can possibly have as a professional, especially as a leader, because it helps you get to the heart of the matter quickly. Regardless of what the answer is, the bottom line is if there's a problem that needs to be addressed with this team member as to why they're doing poorly, it affects the whole project. So then you could possibly use storytelling or a metaphor. And I like to keep metaphors simple initially. Again, those of you that are listening to this could obviously come up with metaphors that are more complicated or even more applicable to your industry. But I like to break it down and make it really, really simple, as in We're all part of a team, and imagine the team just like a huge jigsaw puzzle full of many different pieces that all have to fit together in order for this puzzle to work and come out right. If there is one piece, i.e. the team manager, the team member that's not doing well, if there's one piece that doesn't quite fit, then it spoils the whole jigsaw puzzle. It makes it so that it's not totally complete. So that's why it's important to pay attention to what's going on with your team member so that you end up being a puzzle piece that fits nicely into the whole overall puzzle. So a metaphor like that, where you focus more on their part in the whole team, their part in the whole process, their part in the whole project, versus pointing the finger as in they're doing their job poorly and here's how they're going to be punished or, suffer the consequences for their poor job. It doesn't help the person's self-esteem when you point the fingers that way. What you can do as a leader is help them correct the situation, address the situation, and then after those conversations, if no change is made, then the person that's in charge, whether it's you or their manager, then can take appropriate action to make sure that they don't continue to hold up the project. So, bottom line is, should you use storytelling with a team member when they're doing poorly? Yes, you can. There are times also when it's appropriate for you to share your own story if you've messed up in your journey as a project manager or leader. Be very careful about this, but sometimes it helps to let the team member know that they're doing poorly, and perhaps there was a time in your career when you did poorly. You can go into your bank of stories that you have in your history and pick something that's really, really short so that you can share with them so they have a sense of, they know that you have empathy, and you realize that as a project manager you can understand their pain, you can understand what they're going through because there was a time in your career when you were not doing well and you took steps to change that, and here you are. Now be very, very careful not to be totally squeaky and perfect, as in, okay, I'm like a superhero and I took charge and I corrected everything and here I am. No, they want to be able to relate to you. They want to know that you're human. There may be times that you've messed up. You've taken action to change that, and it's enabled you to be where you are today. So this is an offline exercise that you can do when it comes to developing your story bank. That's what I call gathering stories, so that you possibly use this story when you need to. Now, that's one example of how you could use stories when it comes to working with your teams. And what I'd like to do is to ask for your help. We're going to cover some more questions for the rest of this webinar, but I do need your help in my journey to research how I, as a storytelling coach, can really provide and be a resource to those in the project management community. What I've discovered is that many of you come from different backgrounds, different industries, different. And the people that listen to this call tend to be from all around the world. I've seen where you're from, different countries. So what I'd like to do is help you build your story bank. I know there are many of you that love to research and you love to dig in there and develop your own stories, perhaps find your stories from other people. What I'd like to do is help you with that and make it easier so that I can develop and help develop a story bank where, depending on which industry you're from, whether it's the IT community, whether it is technology, whether you're an architect, whether you're in the building construction community, so that I can help you find stories or get your stories so that we can put them in a large reservoir of information. So if you need these stories, anecdotes, metaphors, you can just go and be able to get those information out online. So what I'd like you to do is this. If you would be willing to help me in this, I'd like you to let me know if you're willing to fill out a quick survey after this broadcast. And it's going to be via SurveyMonkey, and I say that because I will send you an email and it will say SurveyMonkey. So don't put it in spam or trash it. It's me. And what I will be doing is asking you essentially 4 questions about how you handle communication in your world Do you have challenges? If so, what they are? And obviously you don't share anything that's confidential, but if it's something that keeps cropping up, then I'd like to be able to hear about it so that I can then do the research, help you find analogies and stories, and then have them available to you. So, 4 questions. You type in your answers. Hopefully it shouldn't take you that long to fill this out. And what I will then do is gather all these answers, gather all these findings, and then be able to really, really help create a resource for you so that you can come and find the stories, your metaphors, and your analogies. So, would you like to help? The answer A, yes, I'd like to help, or no, I don't have any challenges. So I know the poll is open, and Ms. Denise has done her thing, and if you go ahead and be so kind as to let me know if you would be willing to help. And then what will happen is that you'll get the survey before the end of this day. If you're listening to this call after the live broadcast, then what I do ask you to do is just send me an email to msjenjen.com, and what I will do is send you the survey separately and then be able to connect with you afterwards. Okay? So I would appreciate it very much if those of you in the project management community can just help me with this so I can help you. All right. So while we're waiting for the poll answers to come through, let's go ahead and take another question. Question is, how can I use storytelling to deliver bad news to a client? Ooh, that's a tough one. I always say that sometimes project management is equivalent to being stuck in between a rock and a hard place. That's an analogy and metaphor right there for you too. You are always sometimes seen as the bad guy. And because many of you may not have authority, you have responsibility, but not authority for a lot of areas of your project, it seems that when you have to deliver this news, the messenger is going to be shot, for lack of a better term. So there are times you just have to be transparent and be professional. And if it's bad news you have to deliver, then sure enough, tell them the truth as much as possible. Now, perhaps consider taking the mindset, oh, yes, I'm telling you the truth. However, it is better to deal with the truth now rather than suffer the consequences later. Always get in trouble there. Better to, again, get a hold of it now than suffer the consequences later. One story that one of my clients uses when it comes to delivering bad news is a very general story, and this is a story that could possibly be used for anybody in just about any circumstance. It doesn't matter what your industry is. And unfortunately, it is a true story, but it is one that is well known and very visual and very picturesque when it comes to bad news. So, if you have clients that are rushing projects, I'm sure some of you've heard those people are around. You don't know if they exist or not, but you've heard. Yeah, right. Probably on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, you may have clients that are requiring you to either hurry up a project or add to a project, and then you have to give them the bad news after you've done your research that it's not possible. So a possible little story that you can add to the end of that bad news after you told them no is, I understand, client, that you'd like us to change this project, and here's the reasons why. And I do think it's better to consider that we stay on track with the project the way it is, so that it doesn't end up being like a catastrophe. And the catastrophe I'm bringing to mind is the 1986 Challenger disaster. I know that it's a very painful story, a very tragic story, but it's a very powerful story to know. And I'll give you the synopsis of it for those of you that may not have been around at that time, or you don't remember the details. In 1986, the space program here in the United States had a series of space capsules they were sending up into space in order to do some research. And unfortunately, due to, let's just say this, there was a particular part on the spaceship, specific gasket, O-ring, I guess is what they called it, that wasn't necessarily ready and up to par. And I believe several project managers kind of made the bosses aware of this, and they decided to ignore that information. and go ahead and send the space shuttle up anyway. And unfortunately, you had several people, about 7 space astronauts that died as a result of that. So again, that is very, very graphic, very, very tragic, very, very serious, but also a classic example of when there's bad news that a client decides to ignore and go ahead with things anyway, then it can end up having tragic results. So there may be many situations that you can attest to in your own history, in your own experiences, that enable the clients to get a picture of, I know this is bad news, however, let's just keep going so that we can end up changing the trajectory of this bad news. Another question that came from the wonderful Project Insight community is, how can you add color to your stories? Yeah, there's color. Color meaning making sure that the stories are not boring. So the total explanation of that would take way more time than we have available today. So let me give a synopsis as far as how to add color to your stories. As I mentioned before, everybody is a storyteller. Everybody. There are some of us that have the natural skill and they tend to tell stories better than others, and that's just the way it is. Some people have the skill, some don't, but everybody tells stories. So for those of you that may be in the mindset of, I'm not really a good storyteller, one thing that you can do to add color to your stories is pay attention to what happens in the actual story. First question you ask before you even tell it is, why am I telling the story? What's the intent? Am I telling to teach information? Am I telling to deliver bad news to a client? Which means you expect the client to be in a negative frame of mind before you tell the story. So then you need to make sure that the story is powerful enough and succinct enough so that they can accept what you're telling them. So what is the intent? I've seen, and probably many of you have attended speeches and presentations especially, where the speaker adds a story, because I think somewhere they were told to add a story to make it relevant, to make it connectable. But if they haven't really paid attention as to the intent as to what the story's supposed to do after the person's listened to it, then the story will miss the mark. So always start off by asking the question, why am I telling the story? Then you have to paint the picture in the listener's mind as to what's going on with the story. Take them on a journey. I call it painting the picture. As you're describing the story, it would be great if the listener is right there with you. So there are times when you listen to storytellers, people are telling stories, and it may seem that they're giving too much information, or it could be that they're not giving enough information. And it's always the fine line that you have to walk along when you choose to tell stories. However, if you've got a story in mind, a 2-minute story in mind, and you say, okay, how do I know if this is relevant or not? Then you ask the question, if it's relevant, then I add it. Do they need to know this information? Or is it just filling space? So I'll give you an example of this. I have a client that had to give a TED talk about a year ago, and she uses a very short story as an inspirational story that is very powerful, short and sweet. And it's describing an incident that she went through while she was a child. And the essence of it was that she was actually shot by a stray bullet. Now I know that many of you may not have that as a challenge as project managers, but I'm just giving you as an example because even though the story is about her personally, she uses it to, and the intent is to give people hope, inspiration, and be aware of your surroundings. That's the bottom line intent behind the story. So when I first started working with her, she is very much a logical, bottom line type of communicator. Sky is blue, grass is green, that's all there is to it. That's pretty much how she communicates. That she's a great person for it. You know exactly where you stand with her. But what was happening is, as she was telling her story of the morning when she was shot, people listening to it initially when she first started sharing the story were not grabbing onto it, were not I mean, they felt sorry for her, though she was shot, but she wasn't quite getting it. And after working with her, we kind of found out that is that they weren't in her head with her while she was telling the story. They weren't going along for the ride. So we changed the story to the fact where we described, or rather, she described how she was sitting on her front step, and she was 9 years old at the time, and she described a little bit about what she was wearing and her mood. And basically her mood was she was a little upset because her mother wouldn't let her go out and play with her friend across the street. So you can get the picture in your mind of a little girl sitting there pouting on the step, not happy at all, swinging her leg, and basically just not really great kid to be around back then. So then she heard a commotion. She actually heard gunshots, but she thought they were fireworks. And she described, so I was sitting there, and then I heard pop, 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 and I thought they were fireworks. So I got up to see what all the fuss and bother was about, and then I felt this burning, searing pain in my leg, my right leg. And I looked down, and there was blood pouring out of my right leg. I'd been shot. So I'm going to stop the story there, because that's all you need to hear. But then it paints the picture. When you listen to those words, you can actually see her standing there, looking for the fireworks, and then feeling the pain and realize that she'd been shot. And the bottom line behind that story was a stray bullet that ricocheted off of a building and hit her. Now, fortunately, it hit her in her leg. She got treatment, and she's fine, and went on to live quite a nice, prosperous, successful life. But the way that she initially described it, I was sitting on the step and, just kind of like hanging out, and then I heard these fireworks, or what I thought was fireworks, and then I stood up, and then I realized I was shot. Very, very different from the first way we described it. So that's how you add color. When you think of stories, pick stories that you like to tell. Sometimes, though, I will tell you that some of the most powerful stories that you do share are the ones you don't think you should tell. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything personal about it. It doesn't mean there's any deep, dark secret that you shouldn't share. It just means you may not think it's important. Or, well, let me back up my statement. There are times when I've worked with clients that it is the story that is painful. There are times, though, that you decide, you know what? I need to share the learning lesson. So then we just tell it in a way that you don't necessarily share too much of the pain, but you get your point across so that people can be in your head, get into your emotions, and see the story as you're going through it. So, color, details, characters. Another way that you add dimension to your stories, characters. If you have other people that you interact with, if you're a project manager and you have team members that are fantastic at what they do, and you may decide, okay, in the next meeting or the next update meeting, let me share the success story of this team member. So whether they're sitting there or not, I would sit down and really think about this team member, think about the positive traits that they have, think about people that they work with and work around, how other people possibly feel being around that person. So that as you're describing the story, the situation involving this wonderful team member, the enthusiasm, the emotion, the feeling comes through in your voice. I'm going to use Denise, my wonderful person, my moderator here. I love working with Denise. She's one of the most positive people I've ever encountered. Doesn't matter what I assign to her, she just jumps right on it and she gets to it. And do you know that last week, here's a situation where we had a wonderful encounter with a client, and I'm going to stop the story there because I'm just winging it here. But can you see how when I talk to her, oh my goodness, Denise, so that people can tell that I really, really am enthusiastic and positive about this team member, and then they catch that enthusiasm too. So, color to your stories. Yes, it takes work, and it takes you thinking about how you communicate. But if you do the work ahead of time and really, really, really ask yourself the question, is this story colorful? What do I need to do to make it more exciting? How are my characters? How's the information that I share? Here's another thing to consider when it comes to color. If you're telling a story, does it make logical sense? There are times when we, especially when we experience situations, we were there. So we may not feel it necessary to describe every single detail and point that went on because we were there. And we make the assumption that people knew we were there, so they don't need to hear it. However, if you don't give enough information and make sure that it follows a logical sequence, then people get lost. And what they do is they'll listen to the story, and then if the story jumps from point A to point C, whoever's listening to the story will say, what happened to B? I didn't hear what happened. And then they go off on that track, and it's still asking the question, while you're still talking. So then they miss more of the story. And then you find that the story is incomplete, which even though the person that's listening may not say that to you, but it's a slight feeling of dissatisfaction. And what I want you to do for each of you is, if you know people that tell stories that way, where they never seem to finish or they leave bits and parts out, and there may be a level of discomfort that you feel because of it, that's why. There is no completion. There is no logical flow to the story. So you need to make sure, as you're thinking of the story, logical flow, characterization, and am I painting a true picture? What I typically work with my clients, I have them think of a story and then record it on audio, whether it's on their phone, and then play it back to themselves. Or more importantly, they'll send it to me as well. And then have them hear it from the perspective of them being a stranger listening to the story for the first time. And then being honest with themselves. Because again, if you find that you miss bits and pieces out or there isn't a logical flow, be honest with that. To say, okay, if I was a stranger hearing this for the first time, would this make sense? Would this be interesting? And if the answer is no, then what can you do to change it? The last thing I'm going to talk about with color with your stories, which is very important, is vocal variety and pacing. And I'm going to play out for a second. If you tend to have a verbal way of communicating that is pretty much one note and there is not much variety in your voice and tone, then after a while people will fall asleep after they hear you. And that's not necessarily your fault. It's worked for you so far, but when it comes to telling stories, you've got to have variety in your voice. Your pitch goes up, comes down. Sometimes you're really, really loud. Sometimes you get really, really quiet. Sometimes there's pacing issues where if you tend to speak quite fast, like I will admit, you may have noticed, I do, then I have to make sure that I slow myself down, especially when I'm coming to an important part of a story that I really, really need you to listen to. Or if I really want you to be excited and get into the flow of things and really go off on running with what the story's about, then I'll speed up so that whatever emotions are coming through my voice hopefully translates to you so you get on board with me. So, vocal variety. Take yourself, listen to yourself, and then you can make the determination, are there instances here when I can change my vocal variety to add that much more color to these stories. Okay, so Ms. Denise, how are we doing with that poll? Has anybody decided to help with my wonderful story bank project?
Yes, there is. We actually got a good 82% of
My
want to help
goodness,
you out.
I
And
love them. Thank you. This
yes,
is a virtual hug for everybody. A virtual hug. Thank you so much. And this is not for me. Let me tell you that categorically. I meet project managers all the time. I have clients that are project managers. And what I started noticing is, like I said before, because you're in so many different areas, and I'll get questions, how do you help me? I'm in IT. How do you help me? I'm an architect. How do you help me? I'm in the building construction. And I have a story bank. Yes, I do. But I wanted to hear from the people actually doing the job, doing the work. So I so really, really appreciate the fact that you will take the time to go ahead and help develop, and this is your bank, it's not mine, it's yours. Because what I will do after collating all the answers, getting all the answers together, then I will do is I will let you know as far as how you can access this bank. And it's going to be invaluable to you because you won't have to do the research yourself. You won't have to try and figure it out. You'll have some good tips, ideas, and techniques already ready for you, and then you can customize them to your own situation. What I will also share, too, is for those of you that come from countries outside of the United States, there's sometimes a challenge when you do come from a different culture because, again, I'm based here in the United States. So many of the analogies and metaphors that I may come up with would be totally applicable here in this country, but may not be applicable where you are. So when it comes to the survey, there will be areas where I'll have you type stuff in. If there are analogies and stories that are applicable for your part of the world, please make sure that you let me know that those are available so that if there are others from your part of the world. I know several people that are project managers from India. And because of cultural differences and cultural things that you do there that we don't do here, if you told a certain metaphor or analogy in the United States based in Indian culture, it may not work. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong, it's just it's not applicable because we don't understand what happens. We will understand, why you're coming from that perspective. So please make sure you share with me information from your individual countries and then we go from there. Okay, so do we have any additional questions, Ms. Denise?
Here's more of a comment.
Sure.
They said, no, I think this was earlier on when you were talking about either being direct or, telling someone from the beginning if they're doing a bad job or something like that. So this person says they prefer to be direct because metaphors tend to be tricky when you have a multicultural team. Metaphors may not be understood and may defeat the purpose, which is, I think, what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, totally appropriate comment. Like I said, we work in multicultural societies. So, like I said, you tread very lightly with metaphors and analogies, especially when you're dealing with people with different cultures. However, I always like to paint the picture of we are all a team together. And if something doesn't work, it affects the team, which ultimately affects the project and the client. So that's the only reason I really do like to use metaphors and analogies, very brief ones, very universal ones, so that people get it and realize we're all part of this. So yes, I do. Just pay attention to that. You really got to pay attention to it. Okay. Are there other comments?
Here's another question. Isn't storytelling considered as a more devious project manager?
As a more devious?
Project
Okay.
manager?
Storytelling itself is a devious project manager. Not quite sure I understand the question.
Okay, well, that person can give us a little more feedback.
Yes, you can.
Let's
Oh,
hop
the person
on
can.
to,
Yeah, they can pop
let's
on and
hop
explain
on
that a little
to
bit more.
the
So,
question. Does one have to be careful that storytelling does not lessen one's credibility?
yes. Very fine line between being truthful, authentic, transparent, and using storytelling instead of being truthful and transparent. Meaning, if something happens, the scenario where you have to deliver bad news to the client, and before you deliver the bad news, you start off with the story or the metaphor or the analogy, and then you go ahead and deliver the bad news, that could be seen as, okay, are you trying to manipulate me? Are you trying to soften me up? Before the client hears the bad news, you probably make them mad now. It's even madder than they would be if they just heard the bad news initially, and then try and put a little bit of a positive spin when you finish with the analogy about, taking care of things happening now versus it getting worse later. So you've got to be very, very careful. I get the question a lot, how often do you use them? And I hate to be, again, I sound so wishy-washy. It depends. It really does. Because it depends on who you're speaking with. It depends on their personalities, their communication style. Are they going to be receptive? If I use analogies and metaphors, or my clients use them, like I say, I'd rather tell the truth, be transparent first, and then the analogy after. If after you told the truth and you can tell the person is not receptive, don't use it, because all you're going to do again is make them mad. So it is one of those situations where you really tap into emotions and energy of people or audiences that you're listening to. And sometimes you have to feel this out. And I'll tell you this right off the bat, it will take time for you to develop the skill. There may be many of you that do this naturally already, so you've been doing it. But for those of you, this is new, where you tend to be all facts, figures, content, and information. And now here's this woman telling you about adding stories. Ew, do I want to do that? But in order to connect to people, I've been inviting you all this time to go ahead and do that. Initially, right when you first start doing it, it may feel unnatural and may not come off as smoothly as you'd hope it would. But keep doing it. What you'll notice is then after you, as a person, get out of your head about whether the story's correct and all of those questions, and you start keying into their reaction and looking at their faces and their posture and their body language. And then you'll start telling, or rather start paying attention to and being very intuitive as time goes, when you then have further conversations or presentations and you shared, I'm just going to use the bad news scenario, and you look at them and immediately your instinct will tell you, nope, don't share that story. Or your instincts will then kick up and tell them, well, there may be a little bit of room here. Let me go ahead and add it. That comes with time and practice. Not that actually that much time. We're not talking that you have to study years and do this. No. But after you get into the rhythm of, okay, information, story, information, story, and especially this is more so applicable in negative situations, then you'll start paying attention to whether you should and shouldn't answer them. But my thing is this, oral history is the way we've communicated since humans have been on this earth. So it's not new, and we do it all the time. The key is, though, are you doing it with intention, and are you being strategic about it? And in most cases, the project managers that have been in my circle, 90% of them, the complaint is about lack of communication, not necessarily from that person, but we're talking about people unwilling to share information, whether it's good or bad news. So if storytelling is a vehicle that you can use in which to put this information and to make it relevant and to make it so that you can connect better to the listener, better to the stakeholders, then you might want to consider giving it a try and just working with it until you become comfortable and proficient at it. Great questions, great comments. I love it. Do we have any other?
I'll let you finish up your last few slides, and then I'll save the few more questions for our question slides. Yeah.
Okay, great. All righty. So I've basically given you some insights, some things to consider when it comes to using storytelling. And I want to make sure that I recap what happened in the first workshop that we did as far as concerns as to reasons why you won't use storytelling. Some of the things you may say to yourself, I'm really bad at telling stories. Do stories really have that much of an impact on other people? And this, many of you may say, you know, I'm busy enough as it is. I mean, I don't have time to study, research, all of this stuff is overwhelming. And this is hard and complicated. And where on earth do I start? So, start with the next steps. And I'm going to say this ad nauseum. Be honest with yourself. And assess your communication with your stakeholders. Stakeholders being your management team that you report to, or your team members or your peers or other community leaders around you that have influence on the project. But be honest with yourself. Sometimes, especially when we're in leadership, um, some of us may have egos. I know. It's a hard thing to admit, but some of us have egos. We're very good at what we do. That's why we've been hired. You want to make sure, especially as leaders, that we're willing to listen and be open and honest with ourselves. And pay attention to, really, the percentages of successful projects that you've been involved with. Now, again, right off the bat, I will say again, there are many times that situations totally beyond your control that will cause projects not to be as successful as they should be. Get that. But let's make sure that we own up to our part of it. Then you develop a plan to change what's not effective. Then the next step is to take the time to create, collect, develop, and apply your stories to your verbal communication. And last but not least, sit back and watch. And that's the magic of all of this. There was a phrase that I heard from a TV personality here in the U.S. His name is Dr. Phil. And many times he says this phrase, nothing changes until you do. So many times we will be busy giving others directions, guidance on what they should do, but we're not taking care and leading by example. What will happen is this, as you start to communicate clearly, then others will be forced to change their reaction to you. And that makes for better communication all the way around. So, I have a couple of gifts for you. Now, there may be many of you that were listening to this that may have been taking notes frantically, or you may be lucky enough to listen to this broadcast another time. So what I will do is this, is send you a written summary of the answers I gave for the questions that were answered. I realize there's a lot of information that I shared. I went through some scripts. So what I will do is just summarize it in a couple of pages so that you have it for your notes. What I will also do is send you a free cheat sheet on how to choose the right stories to achieve the desired effect. There are different types of stories that you share according to what you want the intent to be. So I will give you a table that tells you if you want this to happen, this is the type of story that you tell. And this may enable you to really categorize, and when you develop your story bank, know exactly which files to put your stories in, so that as you need to draw them out in speeches, presentations, and even conversations, it's really easy for you to reach and get them, and you know what they're about. For those of you that are listening to this broadcast after the live event here, what you all need to do is send me an email to jen@msjenjen.com, and that's msjenjen.com. And what I will do is send you these information, the sheets and the summary afterwards through your email. Now, I will quickly ask this too. Somebody asked the question, why am I Miss Jen Jen? Because my name is Jennifer Samuel Chance, but I go by Miss Jen Jen. And that's because for many years I've been a performing storyteller. I perform stories around Florida, around the U.S., and my character's name is Miss Jen Jen. So people tend not to remember Jennifer Samuel Chance. It's a long name. It's a wonderful name, but long. But they remember Miss Jen Jen. So for those of you that asked that question, that's why I'm called Miss Jen Jen. Okay, so Ms. Denise, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we'll see what else we have from the wonderful audience.
Awesome, thank you. So let's see here. We have a lot of good questions coming in. So for the first one, so it says, a photo shows everything you see. A painting shows only things you want others to see. Should you tell your story as a photo with all the details or lie a little and show them a painting? That awesome way to put it.
I love it. I know this person didn't say lie now. Okay, so did I not just talk about transparency, authenticity, and truth? However, what I will say is this, though. Storytelling sometimes allows you artistic license to embellish. And I say that very carefully. Embellishing doesn't necessarily mean it's a lie. It will, though, allow you to, for dramatic purposes, to sometimes stretch the truth a little, but not too far. So my recommendation is go with the picture, the photograph rather, let's say that. And then there are times, again, depending on your intent, that you can blur the lines a little bit, have some artistic embellishment, so that there may be times where you want people to laugh, you want people to lighten up. So you may choose to add a description, which is based in truth, by the way. I will tell you this right off the bat. Humor in speeches and stories is about truth. It's not about trying to be funny. That's a whole other webinar in itself. So you may, you may stretch it that way, but I'd rather you stick with truth, because eventually you're caught in a lie, eventually. And especially in the world that you guys operate in, project managers, you're the research kings and queens. If there's a lie in there, people will find out. So I don't want you to be caught in that. So let's go with the photograph. Share the information there. Not everything needs to be shared, but start from there, and then wherever possible, use artistic license. I love it.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay. Our next question: How do you tell a story if the customer is the root cause of bad news? Cough, cough. They caused a mistake.
Let's be diplomatic. That's where I think your story bank would help you, because what I would encourage you to do is to look for stories, situations, whether it's within your realm or outside of your industry, where other clients have been their own worst enemies, and here were the end results behind that. And sometimes you can listen to the news and pay attention to corporations, organizations that are now, were used to be big household names, and now they're no longer around as a result of their own undoing. So again, depending on the situation, I don't know the details as to what this person is talking about, but you want to make sure you caution people, caution your clients to listen, pay attention to warning signs, and if you as a project manager are telling them warning signs and then choosing to ignore it, challenge or disaster. So yeah, I would definitely have several stories with that as the theme, so that whenever possible and you see that the customer is just, oh my goodness, they're running straight into a brick wall, you tell them. I mean, you can't control them. They're going to do what they're going to do. They can't turn around then and blame you, though, for lack of communication. Let me really quickly bring to mind the Challenger disaster too. And I hate to keep bringing that up, but it was a perfect example of just that. When that tragedy happened, of course, everybody was looking for who to blame as to why it happened. And I remember categorically reading there were project managers and leaders way, way ahead of time that said that disaster might happen. And they documented it. And it was communicated. And the client NASA chose to ignore it. So you need to make sure this is what communication is key. You've got to tell. You've got to let this client know this ain't going right. You may be your own worst enemy. And if they choose to ignore it, then your hands are clean. You know, you've done it. You've done your job. That's all you can do. The rest is up to them.
Thank you. And one last question. I often find that telling a good story can be a real icebreaker. Are there any specific techniques for doing this?
Yeah, way more time than we have in this webinar to go over. Typically when I work with my clients, I like to start stories with dramatic openings. But that, I will say right off the bat, though, is my style. I tend to be more of a dramatic storyteller. Some of the most powerful storytelling I've heard from other people that are, and not necessarily professional storytellers, we're talking business people, are cool, calm, collected, not really full of drama, but they've learned to tell a story in such an impactful way that people are riveted. So if you're going to open a story, start a story, then, oh, okay, let me give you this quick secret. Never start off by saying, oh, I'm going to tell you a story, or let me tell you this story. I do not recommend you ever do that. What happens in the listener's mind is they kind of sit back, and their mindset is, okay, they're going to tell me a story, and the old perception of stories were fables, they were fairy tales, and it may not be true. So even if you go ahead and tell the most fantastic story that is rooted in truth, there still may be a little element of doubt in that person's mind. Is it really true? So if I'm going to share, if I tell a story, I'll say, let me share this information with you. Let me share this experience with you. And if I start off my speech with stories, which I often do, then I go straight into the story with a statement or a question that makes people raise their eyebrow. Hmm? What? Did you just say that? And then I go ahead and tell the story. So never start it off with, let me tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story. No, boring. Start off. Hit them right between the eyes with, boom, this is what I'm here for. Here's a statement. Here's a question, a provocative question, if appropriate, so that people pay attention right from the start. You have 10 seconds to get people's attention. 10. And that's, in some cases, sometimes too long for some people. So if you're going to start off with, okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about what happened. There goes your 10 seconds. So hopefully that helps you. That's it, yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
just to close this Q&A, here's a couple comments that I want to share with you guys from our audience. One of them says, you definitely need to use your emotional intelligence to determine whether a story is a good idea. That's one. And another comment that I thought was pretty good was, historical projects make good stories if you deliver it correctly. So there you go, guys.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Awesome. All right, so Ms. Diane was not able to join us today, but she still is running this special promotion for you today. If you'd like to continue improving your project management skills, they are offering a 10% discount for online courses. So go ahead and check them out today. We'll copy and paste that link into your question box. Make sure that everyone has it. And our upcoming webinar, PM in Theory, How to Start a Project on the Right Track. This is coming up next month, February 8th. And next month we'll be exploring the value of the project charter. Putting together the charter is the easy part. However, the challenge comes in creating a mutual agreement on a project solution and deliverables. So in this webinar, you will learn how to develop one that is simple and can be agreed upon all stakeholders. So if you have not already signed up for this one, I encourage you to do so, and I promise you it will be great. So earn your PDUs. You will automatically receive your PDU certificate via email by the end of today. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything else I can help you with, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. You will earn 1 PDU per webinar attended. And to register your PDU, log into PMI.org and log in as a member of PMI, select course or training, and fill out all the information below, which will also be available within your PDU certificate. And for those of you on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @ProjectInsight. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for the latest in PI news. And in our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded videos and webinars for you to watch and learn from. You can sign up for your next project management training, IT methodology, and Agile. Still working on those leadership webinars, so stay tuned for those. And of course, our product trainings as usual. So that's all we have for you today. We'd like to thank Ms. Jen for a great, great, great session. We have a lot of great comments and great questions from the audience. Thank you for everything that you did for us today, covering for Diane as well. And we'd like to thank our audience as usual for your time and for being awesome. And we hope to see you guys next time.